Thank you. An altar occupies a corner of my living room, covered in bits of sacred plants, sage, cedar, tobacco, lavender, that one's mine, stones, shells, and candles, lots and lots of candles. I began a practice of lighting candles for people facing hardship or health crises or the death of a loved one when I found saying, "I'm sorry, that's hard," didn't feel like enough anymore. "May I light a candle for you?" felt more substantial and more, well, prayerful, as tendrils of smoke and flame danced in unseen air currents. Each time I noticed the candle or candles glowing there on the altar, I would think of the person and situation. I held them there in my mind and in my heart. I realize now that this act of candle lighting was and is a form of prayer, holding someone, sometimes myself, in my heart and mind to send energy to them with permission. I don't ever seem to have enough candles. And still, after I light the candle and sit in stillness, I wonder, what is prayer? It's different from meditation, which serves to still and center my mind, my body too. And I certainly have been meditating much more in this last year, but sometimes I find myself needing more. UU Minister Eric Walker Wickstrom said, "The idea of prayer as praying to something is so ingrained that it's hard to imagine one without the other." Simply put, to whom do you pray when your God is a what? How do you have a conversation with an inanimate or impersonal force? That's often a stumbling block, that idea of you're praying to something, someone. Irish poet, theologian, and mediator Padraig Ó Tuama, in his book Daily Prayer, writes, I love this part, "Prayer is a cry. Prayer is an art. Prayer is a small fire lit to keep cold hands warm. Prayer is a practice that flourishes both with faith and doubt. Prayer is asking. Prayer is sitting. Prayer is the breath. Prayer is not an answer always, because not all questions can be answered." That might sound familiar to us Unitarian Universalists. And again, Nimue Brown, in her book, When a Pagan Prays, prayer can be a way of firming up the psyche so as to be able to keep going. It's to see what happens and to work on changing myself, to open my heart, and increasingly to seek peace within myself. The Reverend Jackie Lewis of Middle Collegiate Church in New York City, in a video for the congregation just a few months ago, after a particularly grievous act happened up in New York, encouraged the congregation to grieve, pray, act. So much of what I've been reading and learning about prayer says it's not the prayer itself that is the most important part, it's what you do afterwards. Prayer is that setting up, that creating the intention, creating the plan, if you will, knowing what to do next, that there's something that comes after. So praying for someone and taking a casserole. I found myself turning more and more after the candles and the meditation and the prayer and the acting to an ancient tradition with a modern twist of prayer beads. I'm going to hold these up. I don't know if you'll be able to see them very well, but this is a set of prayer beads that I created, my dragonfly beads. Years ago, I was working with the children in the RE program. I was directing. And having something tactile really helps children and adults to remember where you are in a prayer, what might come next if it's one that you do often. Reverend Wickstrom's book, Simply Pray, is something I turn to again and again and again. It has a history of prayer across religions, especially centered around prayer beads, this kind of device, if you will, to help you remember where you are in a prayer, or just to have a thing to hold on to. And I love this one because it keeps me focused. It helps me remember and name things in myself, in the community, in the wider world. So I thought I would lead through. This is going to be very short. It's not the full practice, which can take sometimes 20 minutes, depending on what's on your heart, to lead you through what this involves. So I have the entering in bead, which has really become kind of a worry stone for me. I kind of hold on to it and but that's my foundation, the grounding part of I am setting aside time right now for prayer, for sacred work. Sometimes that's the only thing I need to do, is hold on to that. And a breath. There's a series of 4 small beads here. That's the entering in beads. And these small beads can just be a mantra that you create yourself. I often just use breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out on each of those. So in between things. As you can see on this, there are 4 medium-sized beads for 4 specific kinds of prayer. So the first one is naming. So naming the holy and the sacred, whatever that name is in this particular week, on this particular day. Knowing, which is knowing yourself. This might be traditionally called the prayer of confession. Those times when in the past week, whenever you had done this before, maybe you could have done something better. Maybe you could have done something differently. So that's the knowing yourself. The third one is listening. So that's what would traditionally be a meditation prayer. So time to just listen for the still small voice and what it might be asking of you, what it might be trying to tell you. And then the 4th medium-sized bead is loving. And that's lifting up those people in your life who may be struggling. Those ones you want to remember. And then we come back to the entering in bead as you're exiting. Sometimes after much practice with this, just holding it or touching it in my pocket is enough to bring me back to that space in my head and in my heart of being aware and present for the holy and the sacred, for lifting up all those people who I love. So let's take a moment and breathe in, and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. And name the sacredness and the holy as being together and gathering today of worship. of spirit of life and love, of mystery, and whatever name you might want to lift up or description. And then breathe in, out, in, out, and in. The knowing bead, to name the broken, wounded, worried places in your soul. What things did I say this week that I wish were unsaid? What could help me heal the wounds from long ago that are still present? What could I bring out of the shadow? We breathe in, we breathe out. We breathe in, we breathe out. We breathe in. We come to listening for the voice of quiet stillness, sitting with the mystery, remembering that any good conversation is making room for listening as well as speaking. We breathe in, we breathe out, we breathe in, we breathe out, we breathe in. We come to the loving bead. You've already brought in so many people with their joys and sorrows. We can bring in the wider world even. Lifting up that there are still children separated from their parents. That though we may feel hope in our country again, there is still much work to do for healing. Our planet still cries out. We breathe in and we breathe out. And breathe in and breathe out. And come home. If you were taking your time a little bit more with this, it could be 20 to 30 minutes. I love the suggestion in Reverend Walker's book, Wickstrom's book, about spreading it out throughout the day. Can you imagine framing your day around that? Naming after breakfast, he says. Knowing at lunch, listening before dinner, and loving before bed. Sometimes the act of putting together the beads is a prayer in itself. So thank you for joining me on that particular journey here. Sometimes I think of these prayer practices as learning a language that we may have set aside when we came to Unitarian Universalism, if you came as an adult. It's reclaiming an old language sometimes, but we can understand it in a new way. If we can reclaim the traditional language around prayer and understand it and practice it, that opens a doorway or window to other religious traditions as well. If we're seeking to become that multicultural, anti-racist community, the beloved community, that's the kind of language we need, because it takes more than just one community to create that. That is our challenge. To go with respect, humility, gratitude, and the prayer on our lips and in our hearts, so that we may work alongside people of different faiths. I'm going to close with a prayer. I think it's a prayer from Octavia Butler in the Book of the Living, verse 33. And in this prayer, the word God is change. So I use the word God, meaning change. Respect God, respect change. Pray working. Pray learning, planning, doing. Pray creating, teaching, reaching. Pray working. Pray to focus your thoughts, still your fears, strengthen your purpose. Respect God, change. Shape God, change. Pray working. Amen. Aho, Ashe, blessed be.